Welcome to the Going Green podcast, and today we're going to have a look at the year 2022. We're going to have a look at this sort of year in review and see some of the highlights of what's happened this year.
And possibly some of the bad things as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, we seem to have had quite a few good things, but also quite a few bad things. And possibly, if we got time, we'll talk a little bit about recycling this Christmas as well, since this is something that's sort of really up to date on a year in review. Anyway, so I remember the year starting really with the gas crisis.
Oh, you're missing out on a major thing that happened.
Yeah.
You forgot there was an eruption of a volcano in Tonga in January.
Yes, and that really does put back climate change quite a little bit. We look at how much, not pollution, but how much sort of stuff is just basically put into the atmosphere by a volcano. And this is sort of a phenomenal amount. And we think about, sort of how much the cars put out and how much the cows produce. And it pales into insignificance compared with what a volcano can do in just a few weeks.
Yes, exactly. So that's why it was one of those odd things where this undersea, and it was an underwater volcano. So it was one of those things where it just blew. They were talking. There's lots of disaster relief that happened in Tonga, which is where roughly it is, and all sorts of things. Anyway, so that happened. And then not saying the next thing. This is where the problem of being how we are is saying, oh, it's year in review. We designate things into years. But of course, what we really should be doing is more looking at sort of seasons, because of course, coming up to February, of course, the US reported that the winter, because obviously they're just coming out of it, it had the worst drought, as in least amount of rainfall they've had on record for how much, and they declared lots of drought in all sort of the middle and western of the USA, which was huge because, of course, they were having problems anyway. And then they declared that they were going from a very dry summer to a very dry winter. And basically they were just suffering, saying, how much the drought was. We're talking about, I remember talking about how the Colorado River, this huge river, said it was getting lower and lower and lower and lower and lower to the point where they said it was becoming unnavigable, as in you can travel up it miles where it should have been. And it was just one of those things where it was quite a devastating, this little tiny part of it. So, so that's in the relation to the next thing in February that happened, to which came the huge, I say crisis. The Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, of course, at the end of February, which caused global ramifications, which we're still feeling now.
Yeah, with all the gas and all the other problems. I was going to just say on your comment on the US, it's going to be very different this year with their polar vortex, which we'll cover in another episode. Right, so we had this basically unwarranted, made up in need for the invasion of the Ukraine. And although it's severely affecting Ukraine, it's basically the idea that we are going to try and effectively sanction Russia and work on their sort of oil production. And of course, then they're also saying, right, okay, well, Europe, you won't have any gas from us, and all the ramifications that have taken there. And the basic idea of putting the cost of sort of oil and gas up through the roof, which has affected just about every country in the world. And the shame was that many countries should have then gone and looked forward towards, well, let's go fully renewable. Let's sort of invest heavily and sort all this out once and for all. But they haven't done that, have they?
Well,
They've
no, there is a problem of they need this stuff now as opposed to later, which is unfortunately what the investment is. Because they haven't been investing heavily, they needed the production of the renewable plants to be up at a scale they require them, and it wasn't there because of lack of investment. Anyway, but one of the major things we saw in the relation to the Ukraine crisis and the thing is the fact that suddenly Europe was looking to decarbonize its economy in the next 30 years and wind everything down, and that was good. Suddenly, the target changed from 30 years to 5 years, and so suddenly, we're talking the whole system switched over, and basically, everybody's fighting over trying to become carbon neutral, so we're not reliant on the Russians for their gas, so then they can't blackmail us. And that hopefully meant that we could sort of, help that way. But of course, another crisis which we didn't know about that happened because of the invasion was, of course, all the grain crisis. How much of the grain, they say that Ukraine is the grain basket of Europe, and suddenly you've lost that grain basket. How many countries were sort of going on to starve and go on into fashion without the grain from Ukraine? And we never knew that was a big thing, and now it's one of these things where huge ramifications that way. We're talking places like Yemen, who are suffering severely from droughts and all these, not droughts, famine, because of the lack of grain, and then they have all sorts of problems. So as I said, this ongoing crisis, this ongoing thing is causing problems. Next year we'll still be talking about the Ukrainian crisis and all these sort of things and how it's affected things, because of course it is one of those things where it is ongoing. We're not talking about these things as a one-off event. The Tonga volcano, that was going on for about 3 months. So it's not just a sort of a singular event. We're talking a long period of time to do things. And so one of the major things that actually happened was in March, lots of the nations of the world in the UN decided to agree to fight plastic pollution. Now, how they were going to fight plastic pollution, that yet to be discovered, but they all agreed that plastic pollution should be something to fight over, which is sort of, they basically looking at putting limits. They're investigating what limits should be set on, say, plastic pollution, causing sort of this, we'll talk about it a couple of years' time when they actually come up with this deal. But you've got to remember that this year we had a small COP, so we'll get to in the calendar. But that was a small COP where this sort of deal happens, and this is what the negotiation part was for. So it just shows that sort of things are happening, but they start off, here's the starting date, not nearly sort of it happened on this date.
I think more came out about microplastics as well. And not just what I thought were microplastics, but almost mini plastics, these sort of little plastic beads that you can find along the beach and sort of pick up. So there was much more coming out on mini plastics, these little beads, as opposed to just microplastics, which are eaten by all sorts of animals and then entering the food chain and getting into us as well. So we suffer just as much as many other animals. In fact, in some respects, more so, because being a animal higher up the food chain, we sort of manage to concentrate the plastics more in us than perhaps animals lower down the food chain.
Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that's happening. The March didn't really anything exciting happen, apart from, of course, we had all the Saharan dust, which is what we usually get. So it's nothing major. It's an event that happens is the critical thing. But of course, it was just how the weather patterns blew. We had all this orange skies, but it was just basically the Saharan dust covering.
But it is how that affects the climate itself, isn't it? By having much more dust in the air, we find that we've got quite a change in the climate. And we saw that.
Yeah, and the more important thing about that dust is that we saw it spread, I wouldn't say further, but spread to places where it hadn't been seen before. That was the incredible part of it. It was sort of, people mainly talk about it in Spain, but you don't talk about it in Denmark. And so you can see this sort of how the winds basically just blew this huge dust storm. I say dust storm, but this swathe of dust up through the atmosphere. So that's what sort of happened, and that's got its ramifications that way. But then we moved on to April, and the UN dropped its one of its, I say, bombshell reports. It basically said that it's do or die now in relation to climate change or dealing with climate change, and it urged people to say, you've made all these concessions from last COP, time to actually implement any of these things. And essentially, well, who knows if people have been putting them in, but it was one of those things where it was the do or die moment. And we were talking about this shocking report, So
I don't really feel that actually did happen. That's my honest opinion. There's been an awful lot of talk about we will do this and we will do that. And we heard that starting at COP26. But the following year, we've seen very little of that really making an awful lot of difference. We needed to see radical change taking place. And what we saw was, well, something either very mediocre or barely happening. And then you come to COP27 and some of the countries just pulling out of various agreements they made in COP26. So not only not really getting started, but just saying, we're not going to bother.
Sign up for a landmark deal and then effectively just back out of it the year after. It's just one of those annoying little problems. So anyway, so that sort of idea happened, and there were a few other, I say, interesting things that happened in April, but it's not really one of those big months of climate change. Lots of stuff was just happening as opposed to major landmark events. So we were gonna skip April from that and move into May and basically say, would you like to know what happened in May? And the answer was, well, this heat wave we talked about in the summer. Well, unfortunately, it started much earlier, as in May, in India and basically in Pakistan. And suddenly they were having this huge record amount of heat down in there. And it was just unprecedented how much. And I remember saying how bad it was. They were talking about how much of a drought they were going to get, because of course not only did America not receive their, but lots of places received this huge lot amount of water. And so it was this huge extraordinary event of just people were sort of just not, I wouldn't say dying in the streets, but they were just
well, no, they were,
it was just unprecedented, making and the report was that said, which was the important part, was that this heat wave, or this early heat wave, was actually 30 times more likely due to climate change. I remember that being one of the headline articles saying that this heat wave happening would have happened if climate change wasn't a thing. So it just shows you that sort of, as I said, all these things are ongoing and we can't sort of take anything for granted.
Yeah.
So we move across into June and we say that not climate change became 20 years old. That's the wrong way to put it. But having actual institutes and centres monitoring and trying to change or fight climate change was actually turned 20, as in the climate centre or the Institute for Climate Change turned 20. This huge organisation that tries to prevent climate change was saying our fight against climate change has been happening for 20 years. And that just shows you the scale and the longevity of climate change. It isn't sort of, you can just fix it overnight. It is this ongoing battle. It is something that needs to be looked at and sort of regularly reviewed and all those sorts of things.
Well, the summer, which we're getting to now, is when we did manage to get record heat waves, not just in the UK, but in several European countries. We got quite a lot of those sort of happening. And of course, we're going to see more of those to come in the next few years. And related to that, we also see Africa expecting worsening food crises. And some of these are centered on the Horn of Africa.
Yes.
Yeah. Which are displacing, millions of people. The UN came up with that 4 out of 5 countries on that continent are unlikely to be have sustainably managed water resources.
That was it. Yes.
By 2030.
Yeah, and it's sort of one of those things where it's huge problems. It's just one of those things where lots of a wake up call had to happen, and essentially not many wake ups did.
They needed a lot more wake ups, and yeah. Anyway,
so moving from July, where things were not looking great, to suddenly this huge Europe wide heat wave, and basically some of the world's, well, not largest wildfires, but places that hadn't recorded wildfires happened, suddenly got them. We remember in the UK, we received our first, not actual wildfire, because we get them in sort of places like the Brecon Beacons and all those sorts of places, but it was the wildfires in the part of London, places not known for their wildfires, and then suddenly London's on fire.
And we had that village destroyed, virtually destroyed in Kent, didn't we?
Yeah, and it just shows that sort of, it's not how widespread this heat wave and this sort of wildfires across Europe were, but it just shows you how sort of even the UK wasn't prepared for the wildfires because of how much of the wildfires happen. But of course, we were suffering this heat wave, we were suffering this drought, and sort of going, well, we're now suffering, here's the problem. And we were looking desperately to try to find some relief from this. And it didn't come because it was just pouring in. I remember broadcasting in the heat, sort of going, sort of sweating back and go like this, sort of like how hot it was. But yeah,
our hottest day ever, wasn't it? It wasn't just we managed a heat wave, we broke a heat wave, but it wasn't just one part of this country just managed this record temperature. A lot of the country managed record temperatures, and that heat wave was becoming sort of more over the country, and it was sort of high 30s were becoming sort of the normal.
Yes. And one of the things I'm going to say is that in this year, you look at, I know it hasn't quite ended officially, so we can't say report them. Of that, however, people have put predictions and sort of say roughly that they're going to say that year 2022 was the hottest year on record, and this year, as the year 2022, broke approximately 7 major, like say, targets. No, not targets. More sort of barriers. Just records, really. Yeah, on things like temperature, but also on how dry it got. We're talking about how much pollution was. All these bad records that
they all happen to work together, don't they? This is the point. They all work together to give us this sort of common climate problem. The Met Office released on the 20th of December this year the global temperature forecasts for 2023 will be some of the warmest years on record for global average temperatures, And this coming year is going to be the 10th consecutive year where we're going to see the average temperature exceed 1 degree Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. And that really is frightening to think of. It's the whole world is, sort of 1 degree hotter. And we're looking at, well, 1.5 being a really disastrous point, and quite a lot of places are over 1.5 already.
Yeah, and it just shows you that that's the sort of thing that's happening, is huge problems in relation to our climate and how much we're going for the things in the world. Is sort of things are changing, and things are changing fast. You can't say that in this year that things didn't happen. The answer is things were happening. We were witnessing them. We were there.
Well, the catastrophic floods in Pakistan, that declared in August, we had terrific heavy flooding there, landslides, monsoon rains, and, a third of Pakistan underwater, tens of millions of people sort of displaced. But there were also the ones that we didn't hear so much about, the unprecedented sort of floods in Chad, which affected 340,000 people in August. So, we basically sort of had heard of some of those things. Some of them made the news. Some of them really sort of didn't make it as much. We're looking at 3.4 million people in the West and Central Africa were in desperate need of aid.
It just unfathomable, these numbers, but these things happen. They really did, and most, as we said, some things hit the news line and some things just don't. So it's hard really to say, unfortunately, what happened. But although things don't make the headlines, things are happening. The news is trying to get better and reporting things. But when there's just so much news, what do you put in? Do people think is important? And
which crisis is more important than the other?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got those sorts of issues happening there, which is you can't report on everything. So this is the major shame in all the things. So what the next, thing really happened was, finally America got on board. It published this huge record amount of money for climate change prevention and all sorts of things, where you have to give money for renewables to all these extra projects, huge amount of funding, which has been lacking for the last, they estimated, was 10 years, but basically sort of 5 years, everything was ramping up and America didn't. So this is sort of their first attempt to push the needle back. And we'll wait and see whether they've managed to push the needle back, because of course the report keeps saying that it's not just a one-off, say, spend now. It is the constant investment in doing things.
It's the education of people. It's the changing of people's attitudes to the way things work. In July, the UN actually declared that basically a healthy environment was a universal human right.
Yeah.
And we certainly can't say that we can see that at the moment. Some places do certainly not have a clean, healthy environment. You've only just got to have to look around to see how bad, things are.
Yeah. So
I suppose we've got to move on because we're running out of time, and
I know it's getting there.
We need a bit more of the year to get through.
Well,
so where do you want to start?
Well, I was going to say, in October, of course, we released the greenhouse gas bulletin, which of course was this huge thing saying basically we're addicted to fossil fuels and we need to stop. A lot more investment was required. We're talking about sort of things such as I wouldn't say that there was a huge weather storm. This is not now. This is in October that happened, but I can't remember where it was. It's one of those things where it just says weather storms happened.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at pollution levels, and it's not just carbon dioxide, but nitrous oxide and methane, which this year saw the biggest year on year jump in concentrations over the last 40 years. This is a year when we're supposed to be doing things, yet we actually saw here this year the largest jump. And that's certainly not good. Yeah, when you said we are addicted to fossil fuels, yeah, people really are. They don't want to sort of leave them. They feel that this is the best way of doing things. And the answer is, well, no, it's not. There are better ways. There are different ways. And it is about education, trying to change people. I think really this year we've seen really little headway on phasing out fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Countries are talking about we'll get rid of it by 2050, but by that time we'll have breached our 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we're already seeing a lot of the damage from that, and we're going to see more to come. I would say the worst is yet to come.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunately the biggest thing is that, we're seeing all these challenges and through, and, and it needs to be dealt with. This is the major problem, plight with all these things, is the fact that we need to do something now, and things aren't happening now, or they're not happening quick. Finally we had investment, great, but that investment is going to take about 5 years to take fruition. If you started investing 5 years ago, it will be hitting it now. That this is the common plight, and then people say, yeah, but it's for government to do, and sort of not for we the people, because it's one of those things where, well, we don't have the money to do so, but the governments, collectively we do, and so, but people aren't interested in doing these things until things happened. We weren't interested in the flood defense in Pakistan until it all went flooded. Bangladesh was reporting how much its flood defense was it needed, and it needed more climate prevention in regards to in Bangladesh, where basically they said they had no land to live off. So where are you going to put them? It just shows you that that's the stories, and those are the problems that we're facing, and that things could have happened. Bangladesh could have built some new dams. Great, wonderful. Except we didn't have the money to do so. We needed investors and people to put money into it. Except those people weren't interested in building a dam because, well, a dam's not going to make me any money. So it is this attitude towards things.
It's a whole world problem that we see. We hit something which I thought might change the world, which it has, but it hasn't. And that was the COVID-19 pandemic. The whole world suffered from COVID-19. And some countries said, yeah, we're all right. We're looking after ourselves. And other countries did try to sort of see if they could try and help the rest of the world, because until we can get the whole thing under control, it's not really going to help and benefit anyone. We've got to try and get things under control. And that is a holistic, literally a holistic process that we've all got to go about. And trying to do climate change is got to be a whole world effort. We've got to see everything going on from north, south, east and west.
So, and the next final, I say, we hit November, and
COP27.
And that was just COP27, a small COP in relation to, we had the big one in the UK in last year. This was a very small one, and we noticed some things, important things, such as people drawn out, and nothing really came out of it. No one's got any landmark things. They got the bill that sort of climate reparations were being paid, as in basically climate rights and sort of they call it loss and damage funding for developing countries, as in places like Bangladesh, to say, get some money because, of course, the lack of we've suffered, therefore, why should we pay to when you're the ones who caused it. Yeah, it's huge landmark bit of legislation, but we'll see whether or not that happens. And so, but nothing major happened in the COP27 to report. They barely got this thing out, and everybody was just saying how uneager people were on working. They were talking about how places that said they were on board suddenly weren't, and they were on board just because of COP26, where it was a big landmark one. And this year they just reneged on that decision, and it just shows you that sort of, the eaves and the woe, not the eaves and the woe, but the ebbing and flowing of people's opinions on climate change just really reflect what they do. And that brings us
to December,
all the way to December, where nothing major is happening.
Or how about America?
Well, the more importantly thing happening is this. Finally, just recently, is this huge? Was it bomb? It was that.
Well, they call it sort of a weather bomb, isn't it?
It's just
basically how the weather's got very, very much worse, and dipping the cold air's dipping right down to places like Texas, and we're seeing places like Miami, with their palm trees and sort of almost frosts and things there. It's coming to us, of course, and we'll see that when we talk about 2023. We're looking at changes taking place. The last of the things is, at the moment, it's still Christmas. Soon will be the time to get rid of all those Christmas cards and to recycle them all. Soon will become the time to get rid of your Christmas tree and to remember to sort of either take it back where you got it from so it can be replanted, or it can be shredded and turned into compost.
Yes.
All that sort of wrapping paper. And I hope that many of you have moved away from having all that glittery, shiny, sort of plasticky sort of wrapping paper. We did all on our family, but we still received some from others. And hopefully we can sort of put that in landfill, but most of the other stuff will be effectively recycled. We did discover that most of our boxes that have come over the last month are now being recycled this week because they were all disguising various presents over the last month. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do for recycling to do your bit this December.
Mm-hmm.
We look forward to the year coming. We hope that the year coming will be considerably better than the year that we've had. We're looking forward to a much better 2023 than we had a 2022. Until then, from Paul and I, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in 2023 with some more Going Green.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Right. Bye.